What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Canes Insight Daily Podcast, powered by Anajar and Levine Accident Attorneys. It's Take Your Child to Work Day, so I got my sons Eli, Jack. Loaded show for you today, just like it's a loaded visit weekend and early next week for the Canes with portal visitors. You got a big-time defensive tackle visiting early next week with his teammate, another stud defensive tackle. We'll be talking about that. Also, it's draft day today. We'll be talking about some guys who may be shaking the commissioner's hand in the future. What 5 players have the best chance to be first-round picks in the future? We'll talk about that. Also, a big-time basketball transfer outgoing, Wooga Poplar. We'll talk about the impact of his decision. First, I want to tell you, my friends at Anajar and Levine Accident Attorneys, if you or someone you care about has been injured in an accident, you got to take care of the situation. You got to take care of your loved ones. You got to make sure you're in the right hands. Look no further than Anajar and Levine. 1-800-747-FREE, 1-800-747-3733. Take back control of your life with the absolute best, Anajar and Levine. All right, so big day today. Big day for a lot of college football players. It is draft day. We'll be talking about maybe some future draft picks that are already on the team or coming on to the team potentially this week. And so we're bringing in Peter Ariz, somebody who is finally free on draft day. You've been working the last few draft days. How's it feel to be sitting in this seat?
Yeah, it's nice. Obviously, it's great to see these guys' dreams come true and their families. Everyone's celebrated. There's been some great moments that I've been a part of, but excited to be here with CanesInSight, with the Canes family, and it's going to be like that moving forward.
Well, let's start with somebody that the Canes would love to enter the draft in a Canes uniform. Last time we saw him was in a Michigan State uniform. We talked about his teammate Simeon Barrow on yesterday's show. He's going to visit Miami early next week, and 247 reported that his teammate Derrick Harmon will be joining him on that visit early next week. There's a defensive tackle from Michigan State. Again, so 2 defensive tackles from Michigan State visiting at the same time early next week. Harmon will be at USC today. He will then visit Colorado before circling back to Miami. So this is a huge visit. You saw the Dennis Smith tweet last night with the Miami Vice picture. Is he trying to have a duo reunite here? We'll see. But the story on Harmon, 6'5", 320. So a bigger body than Simeon Barrow, who, again, we broke down on yesterday's show. Barrow more of a active, athletic rusher. Harmon, a bigger body. 15 starts, 71 tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, and 3.5 sacks. Now, I can tell you with Harmon, I watched him in the Washington game. So it was 2022, going against Washington's offensive line, which would be, I believe they won the Joe Moore Award this year. So you get a good comparison for what he could do. Also got a good look at Barrow again. So it was a nice look at those two guys. And my first takeaway has nothing to do with the Canes, which is that Michael Penix, I strongly believe, has a chance to be the best quarterback in this draft, at least top 3. He shouldn't go anywhere outside the top 5. Teams are overthinking it. We'll see if I'm right, down the road. But beyond that, Harmon, watching him compared to Barrow, again, Barrow's smaller, more active, more lateral, always working with his hands. Harmon is a big body, looks the part, not fat at 320, looks lean, long arms, fluid mover. Not as dynamic of a pass rusher as Barrow. He's basically just using his arms, locking out. Maybe he'll do a swing move, but he's not going in there with some very sophisticated pass rush plan. He does, however, have a lot more power and just more mass. He's harder to move. Better against the run. There was a 4th down stop late in that game, a goal line stand where he was a key part of it, made some tackles, pushed the pile back, and just really used his size and girth to hold the fort against Washington's running game. He did not leave the field on 3rd and long. So he does probably play better against the run. He is somebody who did not leave the field on 3rd down, had a swim move pressure on Penix. Again, not a dynamic rusher, 3.5 sacks for his career, but somebody who at least is relied upon to play 3rd and long. Also saw a zone drop from him, which was interesting. He looked pretty fluid doing that, and he almost picked off a screen. So there's an athlete, there's a body type guy, there's someone who physically looks the part, and even though he's not been a dominant player, has been a good player for Michigan State, which is why he has interest from so many schools now that he's entered the portal. Pete, I don't know what your thoughts are on Harmon.
I mean, I've said it on the podcast and even our conversations off air, the biggest need for this defense, everyone's talking about secondary and needing to add depth there, but you need to add some size there. And Barrow, I'm a big fan of his. We talked about it yesterday. He's a guy who has a quick first step, explosive, getting up the field. but you need someone to be able to eat these blocks up. And we saw it last year at times as well. Leonard Taylor having to play a role that he wasn't necessarily best suited for, right? Because he wasn't a 315, 320 pound plus guy either at that position. And you have a ton of athletic guys in the interior. We understand there are, multiple guys who have the ability to also play inside, outside, such as Ruben Bain, Mesidor. But you need this big behemoth, 6'5", 320 plus in the interior there, not only in run situations, obviously, but it is interesting, as you noted, that he does not come off the field. It did not come off the field at Michigan State on 3rd and long, right? So I think having him in the middle there, obviously depth is important, but I think he's a guy who comes in right away and is right near the top of that depth chart.
And look, Miami's selling these guys on playing together. These are obviously teammates. They know each other. They're friends. So the idea is you come to Miami as a duo. You join up with C.J. Clark and Marley Cook. You now have 4 veteran defensive tackles in a rotation that could potentially be part of an ACC champion playoff contending defensive tackle rotation. Now, it's not going to be cheap. These are defensive tackles. Defensive tackles are always at a premium, especially guys that can play. They have offers from a lot of big schools. It is going to be a battle. Barrow was at LSU. Harmon, I mentioned, going out west to USC in Colorado. He's already visited some top Big Ten schools when he first entered the portal in the winter portal period. Elected to go back to Michigan State, but now has come back out. So clearly, he's not going to be a cheap commodity because defensive tackles are so hard to find, particularly guys with that body type, 6'5", 320. So if you haven't donated or joined up with Canes Connection, please do. 20% off. Promo code CIS. Miami is trying to bring in this defensive tackle pair together on top of the 2 transfers they already got. You already have you already have Ruben Bain and Mesidor on the end. You could potentially bring in a Tyler Barron, we talked about a couple shows ago from Tennessee, as another veteran defensive end that's going to be a hot commodity. So this defensive end could look totally different, but it's not going to be cheap, but it'll be worth it because we're talking about veteran defensive ends and defensive tackles that can help you win the ACC. Now that's next year. I want to look even further in the future and talk about Thursday, first day of the draft. No Canes are going to go. We all know that Miami is not Miami unless there's people shaking the commissioner's hand, multiple players shaking the commissioner's hand in the first round of the draft. So if we get back to that, if we get back to where we need to be, that's going to happen. So it got me thinking, who are the players that could be shaking the commissioner's hand in the future? And I wanted to start at the top because me and Pete, Pete obviously has been working the draft, dealing with scouts, been in that world for a while. He's got great insight there. Let's start at the top because we both have the same top 3, so we can just go bounce off each other. For both of us, number 1, as far as most likely to be a first-round pick, Ruben Bain, one of the best pass rushers in the country as a true freshman. Not the ideal body type. I don't know how he's going to test, but the ability to go through you with power, the ability to get around you with the bend and the first step quickness and the lateral quickness to beat you inside. I mean, that's a 1-2-3 combo that I think is pretty hard to stop as a pass rusher. So, Pete, what do you see with Ruben Bain?
Yeah, it's interesting. You said he's not the prototypical first-round pass rusher, right? But I think pass rush production translates. And you saw a guy like Kalijah Cansey from Miami Northwestern. Obviously, he played more of an interior pass rush role as a defensive tackle at Pittsburgh and had a great first year for the Tampa Bay Bucks. A lot of that stuff gets thrown out the window when these scouts put on the tape and time after time see that guy beat the guy across from him as dominantly as we know Ruben Bain does. And then you understand the other side of it with Bain is the character. He's going to, once the time comes, interview very well in the process. People at Miami are going to have nothing but good things to say about him. But I'm with you there. I don't think teams are going to be necessarily concerned about, what's his arm length and where is he going to line up. Pass rush production translates generally to the next level.
Yeah, and I guess the run, he'll be fine. He's short-ish. I mean, he's not 5'11", but, he's not 6'5", but he's not small. He has long arms. He's extremely strong and powerful. He's great against the run, quite frankly. He's not a long 3-4 defensive end necessarily, but he is very strong against the run. He can throw guys off him and make plays. His motor's outstanding. So I think he checks a lot of boxes, and he's an easy pick to be that first projected first rounder for the Canes. I'd comp him to a Will Anderson if we're doing a comp. Will Anderson, although I think truthfully, Ruben Bain has a little more fluidity and pass rush finesse than Will Anderson, who had an outstanding rookie year, for the Houston Texans. Number 2, we got the same name, Francis Mauigoa out of American Samoa, IMG, Miami Hurricanes, the other true freshman All-America with Ruben Bain. He's someone who tested outstanding. He's a 5-star player, 4.5 shuttle in high school. He really reminds me a lot of someone who's going to hear their name called today, which is Taliese Faugoa. Probably butchering that name, but the right tackle for Oregon State. Similar size, 6'6", 320-ish, great movers, very physical, a lot of power, not the most polished guys necessarily, but guys that have a lot of power and athleticism. And I think they bring a lot to the table, just physically setting the tone. They can play guard, they can play tackle, and they just are physical behemoths who play the game the right way. Pete, I know you had a first-round offensive lineman with Titus Howard. You recruited a bunch. What do you see with Mauigoa?
Well, with Mauigoa, it's interesting because I've said it before, but scouts, when they go into practice, they aren't necessarily going in there looking at the younger guys. They're looking at the guys who are potentially draft eligible for that season, who they expect to go out, right? They'd be wasting their time if they're going in there writing up freshmen and sophomores. But I had a scout who went to one of the first practices that Francis had last fall, I believe it was, and said Mario was almost pulling him aside saying, look at this guy over here, right? So he's on their radar already. The strength is an obvious for him. I've had a couple people tell me he could potentially be a guard at the next level, right? So that's something to watch, but he's going to check all of the boxes you look for there. And again, a guy who came in right away and was an immediate impact player for the Canes last season.
Yep. And then number 3, same name on both of our lists, Cam Ward. Now, we're not saying these guys are going to be first-round picks. We're not saying who's most likely to be a first-round pick. And with Cam Ward, the position he plays, quarterback, if he has a good season, he can jump right into that first round. We saw with Jaden Daniels, the quarterback for LSU, was rated as a day 3 pick going into this year, had a great season with great supporting cast, won the Heisman, of course, is now projected as number 2, number 3 pick in the draft. So it can happen fast. If I'm comparing Jaden Daniels to Cam Ward to me was better in the Pac-10, Pac-12 than Jaden Daniels was. Jaden Daniels went with 2 NFL tackles, 2 NFL receivers, 2 first-round receivers, and blew up. Cam Ward now leaving the Washington State team that he really carried, joining up with one of the best offensive lines in the country, a tight end who I'll be talking about in a second, really good receivers with potentially more to come, Sam Brown visiting this weekend, running back, potentially more to come, Damian Martinez. So he's going to have tools around him, talent around him to really flourish, ACC film. And if he has a great season, it's not a great quarterback draft. You're talking about Shedeur Sanders, who I'm a big fan of, Quinn Ewers, who I'm not so much a fan of, has upside, but is up and down, and a couple other guys. Carson Beck, who's a solid quarterback, someone we know from Florida, high school football here in Florida, but not necessarily a Caleb Williams type. There's room for Cam Ward to move up because of his position.
Yeah, and like you said, D, we're not saying these guys are projected as that right now, because quite frankly, if Ward was a top 3-round pick right now, he probably would be in the draft, right? He wouldn't have come back for another year. He does have some things to clean up in terms of protecting the football, reading defenses, but things change very quickly at that quarterback position in scouts' eyes. Look at a guy like Bo Nix a couple years ago when he was at Auburn. He couldn't protect the football, had a live arm, but really couldn't put things together. Goes to Oregon, cleans a lot of things up, and boom, you have a guy who may not go in the first round, but it's probably going to be a guy who gets picked in the top 40, 50 picks tonight or tomorrow as well.
So now let's diverge on the list a little bit because we had different guys listed as number 4. I'll start. I had Inez Cooper, Miami's right guard, junior, so a draft eligible player. He was, to me, the best offensive lineman this spring. You heard Cam Ward when we interviewed him. Pete, first name Cam Ward mentioned on the offensive line was Inez Cooper. He was the best offensive lineman this spring. He's got the size, about 6'5", 3. His weight fluctuates. He's lost a little bit of weight, let's say 320. But, he loses weight to get to 320, right? He's a naturally big guy, very smart, academic All-American. We talked to other players. They both mentioned his basketball ability. So as an athlete, really has been good on tape. I mean, he's been a consistent, good player. I think he could take it to another level this year based on what we've seen. The physicality is obvious just with the size, the athleticism we talked about. guards are not typically placed with the same premium as tackles. We do see guards get picked in the first round every year. I think the thing that's interesting with Cooper is that when he first got to Miami, he was playing right tackle. And he was fresh out of high school, not an early enrollee, playing right tackle, and he held his own. He eventually moved in and started as a true freshman at right guard, but he was playing tackle when he first got here. So I think he's capable of doing that. I think just his size and his length, the fact that he's built, like a first-round pick, is going to help him maybe overcome the positional stigma of guard and move up in the draft, potentially all the way to the first.
Yeah, and I'll stick with the offensive line. I'm a huge Inez Cooper fan. I'm with you. I think he could potentially be that. But a guy that I'm going to mention here, maybe a little bit of a surprise to Canes fans because he's pretty fresh on campus here and has not played yet, but Markel Bell. You talk about a guy at 6'8", 6'9", 335, 340, right? And when you see him in person, D carries that weight very well, right? And again, when he first signed, I should say, Mario Cristobal had one of the, most resounding answers I've ever seen on an incoming player. And obviously he's coming from the JUCO level, still has a bit of a learning curve, but you hear Coach Mirabal, the way he talks about him, how quickly he's picked things up and how quickly he's improving. May not be a starter game one for Miami, but I think by midseason, whether it's injury reasons or him just forcing his way in that lineup, with those physical traits, the way that the league looks at these linemen, he doesn't need to show all that much. He needs to show just needs to flash, right? And then obviously continue to get better for them to kind of look at him and say, these guys don't grow on trees, right? So Markel Bell is someone that I'm very, very intrigued with at one of those tackle spots.
Yeah, that'd be great, the development, if he becomes that kind of player. Maybe allows Francis Mauigoa to move inside down the road. That'd be huge. Again, we diverge on the fifth spot. And this one I understand is a little bit more of a projection. But Elijah Arroyo, the tight end for Miami, I was, talking to people, talking to different sources on top of what I saw myself in spring. There is somebody who has been around some of the best players that this game's ever seen, Hall of Famers, who's been around some of the best players in the NFL currently, who knows the game at the highest level. And when he watched our whole spring practice, he said the best prospect on this team, to his opinion, is number 8, Elijah Arroyo. There's a guy with size. You see him in person. He's bigger than you think when you see him. He's 6'4.5", but heavy. He runs like a deer. He's got the big brace on. The injury is going to have to be something you overcome. He doesn't have that much tape, but he runs, he blocks, he catches like a receiver. He has a great attitude. His size is impeccable. He's really everything you want in a tight end. He just has to put it together. So he's the kind of guy that if he has an all ACC type year, comes up clean, no injury concerns, he could be a big time riser, because when you really just check the boxes, size, speed, quickness in his routes, receiving ability, natural receiving ability. This guy has been catching balls since high school. He's not someone that's becoming a receiver later in his career. And then willing blocker and effective blocker, checks a lot of boxes. Plus he can run after the catch. Again, we haven't seen it all consistently because of the injuries, but I think if he has an all ACC season, Elijah Arroyo is going to be an NFL tight end.
I'm going to go, to the other side of the football. Damari Brown, obviously coming into his sophomore year at Miami, came on strong at the end of last season. Again, this is a projection, but that position, because of the nature of today's league, also gets overdrafted. You could say he has physicality. He can run, 6'1", 6'2", so he has that size. I just think he's someone, if he continues to develop, could be, a top type of guy at that position.
No, man, it's exciting. We love the draft. I know you love the draft too. We need to see multiple Hurricanes on Thursday, not on Saturday. Multiple on Thursday and a couple on Friday, maybe a couple more on Saturday. It'd be nice when the Hurricanes are really rolling. Guys that barely played get drafted on Saturday. Backups, role players get drafted on Saturday, the third day, the lower rounds. That's when Miami's really cooking, and you have multiple first rounders. So that's where Miami needs to be. Excited to see all the guys get picked tonight. Maybe we get some Hurricanes, hopefully on Friday, definitely on Saturday, and we'll talk about all that on the CanesInSight Daily podcast. Switching gears now to basketball. But first, got to shout out Canes Wear. You see the shirt, you see all the stuff around the studio. You see the hats on my kids' heads. Canes Wear's got us all taken care of. And if you're a basketball fan, they got the jerseys, they got the basketball shorts, all kinds of Canes hoops gear, and of course, Canes football, Canes baseball. Miami Heat, who just had a resounding victory yesterday, would have been an easy series win if we had Jimmy Butler, but they're going to do it the hard way and win it without him. You can get Miami Heat gear at Caneswear and caneswear.com if you're not local. So stop by Arrowhead Plaza if you're local. If not, go to caneswear.com. But anyways, back to Canes basketball. Big name entered the transfer portal, Wooga Poplar. A lot of people thought he was Miami's best player coming into the season, or at least about to be for that breakout. Never quite happened. I was there. I remember the UCF game when he was just unconscious from three, and you thought, all right, it's happening for Wooga, but it never really clicked. Everything from the 3-point line in, I thought was a struggle for Wooga. The core strength to finish, the ball handling, the functional athleticism, I thought was really lacking for Wooga this year. We'll see. There's projections for Temple, but we'll see what happens. Pete, I know you watch Wooga pretty much every game he played this year. What's your take on how this all went down?
Well, first of all, I think Canes fans should be grateful for him being a big part of that run to the Final Four a couple of years ago, because they would not have. He had a couple really big games, hit some really tough shots in that run to the Final Four. So again, like you mentioned, didn't take that jump. Coach L was calling him the best mid-range jump shooter in the country this year. But like you said, really did not take that leap. I don't think physically didn't put the weight on and strength that he needed. But when you look at a potential replacement now for him as Javon Small, Oklahoma State, here Miami's in a pretty good position to land him. I think he would be adding a really nice dimension to this roster next year. Obviously, Nigel Pack coming back, Jaleel Bethea coming in, Austin Swartz coming in, both of them at the shooting guard spot. But like we talk about in football, it's a little bit different, but you don't want to have to rely necessarily on these freshmen. Small played at ECU with Brandon Johnson, the forward who's transferring to Miami as well. A guy whose shooting percentages have jumped every single year. And you and I were watching some of his tape before we recorded this. Guy who can get to the hoop, can distribute 15, 4.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists per game, right? So can do a little bit of everything. Whereas Wooga, more of a straight jump shooter and perimeter guy at this point of his career.
Yeah, Small was finishing big at the hoop, not as tall as Wooga, but like you said, better finisher, better in between game. Not saying he is this player, but sort of my gut reaction watching him was Tyrese Maxey. That style of player where you're a combo guard, you could score inside, you could shoot a little bit, you can handle, you can pass, but really you are a scoring guard and a smart guard and a guard that can score at multiple levels of the floor. So that was sort of my just gut comparison for him. Not saying he's going to be winning NBA awards or anything like that, just in terms of playing style at the college level.
Well, and D, I'll say this. Everyone in the last year has been saying the Canes need a true point guard. They need a true point guard. Isaiah Wong wasn't a true point guard at Miami. He was a combo guard, very much like Javon Small is if you watch him, right? So to me, it's college basketball. You don't need a floor general, right? I think you can get the right mix of guys, but you need multiple guards who – you need guys off the bench who can do it as well, which obviously I still think this is going to be a smaller lineup than most across the country, right? Because it's still going to be a guard-heavy team, and we still have to see how the rest of the roster shakes out here. But I think this would be a huge addition to the roster nonetheless.
Yeah, look, even in the pros, you don't see the pure point guard to me is sort of – it's still a role for it if you have a great player, but it's not a necessity. I mean, the NBA Finals last year – I would say the center was probably the primary playmaker on both squads when it came to creating for others. So it's a new era, certainly in college and also the pros. You need guys that can play and do different things, and Small brings you a lot of that ability.
Most definitely. So listen, Matthew Cleveland looks like he's coming back as well. So the Wooga thing, I don't think it's a surprise to the people in the building. I alluded to it on the podcast a couple times when we have talked basketball. I think most didn't expect him to jump to the NBA after the season that he had. He was getting some first round buzz, which I know you never necessarily bought into, right? But now, you have a chance to continue to rebuild this roster out now, and we'll see what Coach L and staff do here.
And like you said, all the best to Wooga. He's part of some very, very memorable teams here. And he still has the chance to improve his game. Sometimes some guys just need a fresh coat of paint. We've seen that with guys coming here, right? So all the best to Wooga. Hope if he goes home to Temple or goes wherever he goes, as long as it's not a team playing Miami, wish him the best of luck. And as he continues to expand his game and pursue his basketball dreams.
Most definitely.
So thank you guys for joining us. Thank you to my sons, Eli and Jack, for not making too much noise. And appreciate all you for listening. Go Canes.